So it's great to have the opportunity to be here and to actually be teaching as opposed to deaning. So what I want to, now let me make sure, how many people did the homework? It's pretty impressive. Okay, great. The implicit attitude test, but I don't want to start with the implicit attitude test. I want to start with a set of observations. If you've had any opportunity to read anything about me and my bio, one of the things that you'll see is that in various ways, I have been studying the question of how do we effectively manage across differences, cultural differences, identity differences, gender differences, racial differences, for about 30 years. And my one observation that I think has held up over those 30 years is that it seems to be more difficult than most of us would imagine it should be. It seems to be more difficult than most of us would imagine it should be. And so what I want to do is give us some different ways of thinking about why that might be. And there is some research that's emerged out of cognitive science and neuroscience that I think provides some insights. And so that's why, well, there's two reasons why I call this the neuroscience in managing differences. The first is, that there's a lot of research that comes from there. The other is that, I like to stay current and with what's sexy in these days, saying neuroscience as opposed to cognitive psychology, experimental social psychology, that's what's sexy, so. Okay, so, that's why I tweet, it's sexy. Okay. Not that I succeed, but, I'm trying. Neuroscience and managing differences. Another way to think about it is objectivity, mind bugs, and differences. Now, let me ask you a question. How many of you think that you're objective? To be honest, right? It's not a trick question. How many of you, before you walked in this room, if somebody had said, do you think you're objective, would have raised your hand? Come on, raise them high so everybody can see. Okay, put them down. How many of you think you're not objective? This is very interesting. It's the first group I've seen where the majority of people say they're not objective. And I've probably done this talk on 3 different continents to over 100 audiences. And you're the first ones to say that, where the majority of people say they're not objective. Now, people who raise their hand that they're objective, raise your hands back up, because you're in the minority. Okay. What's your name?
Stu.
Stu. Why do you think you're objective?
I'm a certified internal auditor, and part of that is being independent,
Anybody?
objective.
He's a certified internal auditor, and part of that is being independent, objective.
And not duly influenced by any outside factors.
Not duly influenced by any outside factors. So he's got training in objectivity. Certification in objectivity. So he knows he has to be objective, and his job requires it. Now, are there any people here who are auditors who raised their hand and said that they're not objective? That's good, because your job would require you to be able to believe that you're objective.
You got to put that hat on, though. I think in my personal life, I might be more not objective.
More not objective. So it's conditional.
Yeah, I'd agree.
So that's good. So because it's an interesting thing here. If you're objective, to know when you might not be objective. So you raised your hand and said you were objective, but now you just told us that you might not be objective.
Well, if you think you're not going to be objective, you have to take yourself out of that engagement or preclude yourself from engaging with that client.
So today, are you operating in your objective mode or your subjective mode? Are you at home or are you at work?
I'd say it's conditional, like you said, it's situational.
But you're right here.
Yeah.
You're right here. You got to decide. We're working today.
Okay, so
I'm
not objective right now.
You're not objective right now. So you can go back and forth. So I don't know when to trust what you tell me.
Yeah, I would agree.
Don't know when to trust what you tell me. Somebody else who raised their hand said they were objective. Raise it high. Don't be shy. Why? What's your name?
Adnan.
Adnan?
Yeah.
Why do you think you're objective?
Well, when I'm in a situation where I don't have to think, I really believe I'm objective, but when I reflect back, I realize that I haven't been objective. But if you put me on the spot right now, I'll tell you I'm objective, but yeah.
So are you fooling yourself or are you fooling other people?
It's just second nature. It's not about fooling. It's just you believe in yourself more than other people.
But you don't really believe it.
Later on when you reflect on that.
Later on when you reflect on that. Okay. So it's interesting. Two people said they're objective, and by the time I finished my conversation with them, they both are telling me, don't really believe me. But it's interesting. Like I say, in most audiences that I talk to, 90% of the people raise their hand and say that they're objective. Now, my belief is that you're actually all of you are objective. But I must be wrong. Okay. So I'm gonna show you. Okay? And if you've seen this before, just go with it again. We're gonna go to a YouTube video again. I'm trying to stay current. Okay. Now, what you're gonna see are people in white and black T-shirts passing a basketball. And what I want you to do, as the instructions will tell you, is count how many times the players wearing white pass the basketball. During this, you should be absolutely quiet. Okay, I don't want to hear people saying 1, 2, 3, okay, helping others because you know that some of your colleagues can't count, okay, as you've learned in finance and accounting. Okay, I don't want you helping those folks out today. Okay, we believe in teamwork here at the MSB, but not today. Okay? So count how many times the players wearing white pass the basketball. Ready, set, go. Stop. How many passes did you count? Okay. Let's go. 13. My auditor, you were on it, I know. 16. Okay. 13, 16. Any other? 15? 15. Well, are you an auditor? Are you an auditor? No. No? Okay. Just want to know object. I mean, anybody say 14? 14, 15? Okay. What else did you see? Say it again. The gorilla. A gorilla? You saw a gorilla? Well, what was the gorilla doing?
He just kind of walked in there and then beat his chest.
Walked in, beat his chest. Okay. How many people, anybody see anything else? So now we've got somewhere between 13 and 16 passes, pretty low variance. We've got a gorilla. How many people saw a gorilla? Okay? How many people did not see the gorilla? Raise your hand high. What? You did not see a gorilla. Are you sure? Okay. Now, what's your name? Ella? Okay. Now, everybody who saw a gorilla, raise your hand again. Okay. You see how many people raise their hand, Ella? Okay. Tell the truth. Did you see a gorilla? You did not see a gorilla. Okay, so I told you guys that I thought all of you were objective, but I guess I was wrong because Ella didn't see the gorilla, and all you guys saw a gorilla. Interesting. Other people, did anybody else not see the gorilla? Didn't see the gorilla. Okay. Anybody see anything else? Say what? 3 other people in black shirts passing the ball? And how many people in white shirts passing the ball? 3? Okay. And that I know is objectively true. Right? Well, let's go forward. How many passes did you count? Correct answer is 15. But did you see the gorilla? Okay, stop right there. Okay. For people who did not see the gorilla, did you see the gorilla this time? You did see the gorilla. Okay. Let's play it out.
This video is...
Okay. Let's have lights go back up. Now, once again, this group was very interesting in that it's the first time I've ever seen a group where the majority of people saw the gorilla. You've seen it before. Here at MSB? Okay. There you go. I didn't know. Okay. But the first time you saw it, did you see the gorilla? First time you saw it, you didn't see the gorilla. And it goes, what that's about is selective attention. Right? And why? So if you've seen it before, why is it that we don't see the gorilla? Too focused? We don't expect it. We see what we expect to see. Now, think about that as one dimension of managing across differences. We see what we expect to see. Think about how that might relate to some aspects of what we do when we're managing in organizations and what areas of organizational life might be affected just by that rule of we see what we're expecting to see, and what we're not expecting to see, we don't see. And I've even seen people who've already seen the video, see it again, and if they're the kind of people who get really focused on instruction, they oftentimes they forget that they've seen it before. And sometimes what triggers them, what people have told me is, I wasn't seeing the gorilla until I heard people start laughing. And that was a signal to me that there was something I wasn't seeing that they were seeing. And then it came back. Okay. Okay. Tell you what I want you to do, and that is say the color as fast as you can. Okay? Say the color as fast as you can. So, and start at the top left-hand corner and move down, then top of the center, right, up to top of the right-hand column and down, and I will time you. Okay, you ready? 1, 2, 3, go. Okay, good. 12 seconds. All right. Okay, same drill. Start with red, move down. Okay, ready, set, go. Great job, 7 seconds. Okay. One more time. Ready, set, go. Eighteen seconds. What do you think is happening? Go from 12 seconds to 8 seconds, 18 seconds, and I even heard some people simply stop on the last one. Some people simply stop. What's happening? And how many of you seen this before? Here at MSB? Okay, good. I just don't want to overlap my colleagues too much. Okay, what do you think is happening? You just, yeah. Your brain's misfiring. It's getting 2 separate signals sent to it. And how are the signals different?
Well, one, you're reading the text. That tells you one color, but the assignment is to get the color of the actual color. That's a different signal.
Misfiring. Yeah, this is a test that's often used in experiments where what they want to manipulate is something called cognitive overload. And when we have cognitive overload, which is that we're getting signals that seem to contradict each other and we have to resolve them, our brains actually get fatigued. Our brains actually get fatigued. And we find ways to try and short circuit that process of our brains getting fatigued, which is sometimes to simply cognitively give up. And again, you can think about where are the places in organizations where we're likely to encounter cognitive fatigue. And essentially, cognitive fatigue comes about when we've got a set of associations in our mind, like I associate the word red with the color red. Right? So literally, I can see red. It's green, but I see red. And it's a learned meaning, and when something challenges that meaning, it's actually difficult for me to let that meaning go. It does something called bleeding through. Okay? What do you see here? No takers? No commenters? Yep.
Sure I'm wrong, but it looks like a little zombie.
Looks like a little zombie and a big zombie. Why are you sure you're wrong? Right? It's probably some cognitive thing. And even though now you're aware of the fact it might be a cognitive thing, you can't correct for it.
The little one's probably the big one, and the big one's probably
The little one's probably the big one, but now you're guessing.
or they're the same size.
Or they're the same size. That's all the options. The big one's chasing the little one's actually the big one, or they're the same size. But we how many people say the big one is chasing the little one? Okay. How many people say the little one is actually the big one? No takers there. Little one, okay. And how many people, when you look at it, they look like they're the same size? Okay. Most people say the little one's chasing the big one. And the reality is they're the same size. Reality is they're the same size. Now, how many of you are managers? How would you think about managing in a moment where a third of your staff say the big one is chasing the little one? Another third of your staff say the little one is actually the big one. And another third of your staff say they're the same size. How would you think about managing in that moment? And imagine that you think the big one is chasing the little one. Happens all the time in organizations. I think the big one is chasing the little one. Then I have a few people who say, no. The little one's actually the big one. And usually, oftentimes, it's actually an even smaller group of people who say, no, they're the same size. How do you manage in that moment? And it's connected to this, fundamentally, I think, to how effectively we're able to manage across differences. Now, here, what do you see? You guys are a very quiet group. Much more quiet than you seem when you flow in here at night. Looks like the Mississippi flooding. Yep. What do you see? A couple of people walking through river water with a lot of their things. Anything else you notice about the picture? Like a river flood, a flash flood. Yep. Anything else you notice? Yep. Trash bags versus backpacks. Yep. Anything else you notice? Anything you're uncomfortable noticing? It's a white couple and a black woman. Yeah. Why would you be uncomfortable noticing that? Because I'm a white guy? Because you're a white guy and I'm a black guy. Right. Yeah, we'd be uncomfortable noticing. We might be uncomfortable noticing that. I wouldn't. But yeah, how many of you were uncomfortable noticing that, if you're absolutely honest. You noticed it, but when I was asking for what people noticed, we didn't want to see it. Now, these are pictures, both of these pictures are people who were wading through water after the hurricane in New Orleans. And these pictures these pictures were put out by news services. And I want to read to you the captions that were with the two pictures. The one here with the person with a trash bag and obviously a black person says, a young man walks through chest-deep floodwater after looting a grocery store in New Orleans on Tuesday, August 30th, 2005. Floodwaters continue to rise in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina did extensive damage. The second photo, where you have people wading through water, again carrying things. 2 residents wade through chest-deep water after finding bread and soda from a local grocery store after Hurricane Katrina came through the area in New Orleans. And some research was done, and these photos came in to these press services, and editors wrote the captions who were not the people who took the photo. So there are pictures flooding in, and they're trying to depict what's happening in New Orleans. And so independent editors decide what the caption is going to be. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know what the box-looking thing is in this person's hand.
So that's one of the reasons why, I'm sure I know what you're alluding to. I think one of the reasons that looting versus bread and soda finding is because of the items in the area.
So if I've got bread and soda, I find it. If I've got something that doesn't look like I might need it in the flood, I'm looting.
I'm just saying that may be what triggered part of their work, not understanding who wrote this and what their preconceived biases are.
Yeah. Other thoughts? You're pointing. You want to share? Right here. Right here. It looks like Pepsi. Yeah. Yeah, it looks like it might be a 12-pack of soda. Yep, which you might need in a flood. So what do you think is going on? All the way in the back. What do you think it was a decision based on? Think it was race-based? How many people here think it was race-based? Lots of hands go up. Now, do you, yep. And what do you think that would tell us? If everybody said this one was looting, and everybody said this one was finding. Yeah, but I'm saying if we had more, if we could look at all the editorials, right, and people called this one looting, you know, if we could do a natural experiment and everybody got to write a heading, everybody called this one looting and this one finding, what would that tell us? You did like this, but I didn't hear any words.
I think you have every single person out there who writes an editorial who does a different, who makes looting versus finding.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, let me tell you what I think. I think that if we went to these editors, if we went to the editor who wrote this and they were looking at this, it would probably be totally out of their conscious awareness. That the individual who decided to use the word looting probably sees him or herself as being as unbiased as most of us do, or we think we are on a daily basis. And likewise, if we, confronted the person who decided this was finding and said, how do you know it was finding and not looting? Because looting was going on as well. And this relates directly to the test that you took. And what I want you to take away from these examples is that conscious awareness doesn't capture all of objective reality. And part of what makes managing across differences difficult is that there's this way in which we go through life and we have to be invested in this idea that we can be objective. That what we're conscious of is what's really happening. It's not that it's not happening, but it's often that there are other things happening that because we don't expect them, we don't see them. And thinking about how we manage that in organizations, I think is part of what's critical to being able to create organizations that allow us to manage differences effectively. Another thing is that learned meanings can leak through objective reality, like the color naming task. So when I encounter things that don't line up with these learned meanings I have in my brain, it creates cognitive overload, hard for me to manage. I think hopefully, it's happening less today than it was when I came out of school in 1978. But, I think if you talk, for example, to any woman who's an executive today who's over the age of 55, she'll have a story about somebody coming into the office, her sitting in her executive office, and someone just assuming that she must be the secretary when she was actually the person that they were coming there to meet. Because they were coming to meet the boss. Right? Cognitive overload. Well-intentioned people can act on unconscious stereotypes, learn meanings, like the newspaper articles. And one of the things we have to be able to do is to not become defensive when these things come up. So some key concepts that I want you to be aware of is, one, there are two levels that we process on. The first is explicit, which is our deliberate, intentional, consciously accessible thoughts, understandings, intentions. The second is what we call implicit, or automatic or unconscious is another way to think about those things. They're not in our conscious awareness, they're built in some ways. And so the implicit biases test exposes implicit biases by detecting subtle shifts in people's reaction times. It's not subject to self-presentational demands. You know, one reason why I was attracted to this particular instrument in this work is that there's a lot of data in social psychology about, you know, how people can you know, behave when they think that there's something that the experimenters want. And one of the things that they find over and over with this is that when instructed to fake the IAT or to produce a particular outcome, it's incredibly difficult. Vast majority of people can't do it. So if you know, and when I ask people to do the IAT, there are oftentimes a few people in the room who say, the most frustrating thing was I got back some scores, I didn't like them, so I took it again and I couldn't change them. I knew they were wrong. I just hated what it said to me, and I kept doing it, and I couldn't change the score. When participants are informed that their results will be known, responses are still roughly the same. Which again is another demand characteristic that's pretty powerful, which is when whatever we do is going to be public and we have to manage our self-image, can be pretty powerful in terms of changing behavior. But it doesn't on the IAT test. People worldwide have taken 5 million IATs online. It's a pretty extensive database. Implicit biases are strong and pervasive. Now, let me ask you, what were your reactions after you took the test? Some of you have probably taken it before. What reactions did you have? You got the results you expected? Good. And so they were confirmed. Yep. 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 Yeah. Ah. Right. 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 It's a good juxtaposition. And your bias was in the stereotype direction. Yep. Yep. Yeah, which is you know, it's an interesting thing, right? So your values have you working in this direction, but still you're not immune. Yeah. So let me share with you some data related to these tests. And the thing that I would have you think about in these tests is that, you know, what they're measuring is a kind of implicit preference. They're measuring what you go to automatically, which is not to say that you can't consciously overcome the automatic or the unconscious, especially if you're aware of it. So this is the preference for white over black. And what you see is the extent to which you move this way, your preference for white is stronger, and the extent to which you move this way, your preference for black is stronger. And this is about your ability to associate positively and negatively with the different groups. And it's pretty obvious that the population orientation is toward the white preference. If you did it for dark skin, light skin, the data look almost exactly the same. And these are the percentages. So 27% of the population have a strong preference for white people compared to black people, and only 2% move in the opposite direction. And you can see the breakdown there. Now, a question people ask is, well, what about, if you just look at the data for whites and for blacks, what do the data say? What you see here, this is whites, 81% with a strong preference, 7% with 81% with a strong preference for white, 7% with a strong preference for black, and that leaves us about 12% of the people who are essentially neutral in their preference. What about blacks? 40% have a preference for white, 36% have a preference for black, and the rest is in the middle. But connected in the same way to what's your name? To Kate's point, even among blacks, there's almost an equal preference. There's actually a bit more of a preference toward white in terms of making positive associations than toward blacks. And again, where the minority of people are is in the neutral. These are the data for associating gender and career. Male with career, female with family. 24% with a strong preference. Moderate is 32. 20% with a slight. But altogether, the direction of the preference is 76% toward associating gender, female with family, male with career. Now here, what people often ask about is, so what's the difference between men and women? And the more you move in this direction, you're associating male with career and female with family. These are the data from a population of men, 71%. And what's interesting is that the direction for women is even stronger. Now, a question people often ask is, does it matter? Right? So, these social scientists can go out and cook up all kind of interesting tests, but does it really matter in real life? Should you pay any attention to what your scores might say? Here's some data. The less whites smile, speak, and exhibit general friendliness, and the more they commit speech errors in interactions with the black authority, the more they, I'm sorry, the higher their score on implicit bias, the less whites smile, speak, and exhibit general friendliness, and the more they commit speech errors in interactions with the black authority figure. You can think about what might be going on here. Cognitive overload. How fast could we name the colors? The more they were inconsistent with our learned meanings, the less good we were. The more impaired people's cognitive function after interacting with a person from a different racial group. And this was true for blacks and whites. If I had a strong preference for black, the more uncomfortable I am or impaired I was interacting with a white person and vice versa. And there's even been some other work done, some physiological work, where they hook people up to biofeedback kinds of instruments. And what you see is that there's actually a physical reaction, depending upon how strong your preferences are. When you're interacting with someone who's from a different group than you, that you have strong preferences around. The more negative people's rating of an outgroup author's essay. And these were blind ratings. So by that I mean, what they did was they measured someone's preferences. They didn't actually, and then they gave them, some kind of trigger that told them what the author's ethnicity was or what the author's gender was. And then they asked the person to judge the reading. And it wasn't necessarily the case that was actually the author's race or gender or ethnicity. But once someone knew it, if they had a strong preference. And this is also related to an observation about symphonies. Up until about the middle 80s, most professional symphony orchestras were predominantly male. And, great musicians would come in for the auditions. People, it was all about the music and excellence, would produce these predominantly male symphonies. Then someone got the idea to do blind ratings. So now the musician would be behind the curtain. No one could see any of their demographics. All they could hear was the music. And overnight, the demographics of symphony orchestras started to change. The more that this blind assessment was put into place. And there's no evidence that symphony orchestra music got worse. But all along, before that, just about every symphony orchestra conductor or manager would tell you that they had picked the very best musicians they knew to be available. The more negative people's ratings of an outgroup job applicant, the less willing whites are to work with a black partner, the less likely white doctors are to prescribe high-cost advanced treatment drugs for Latinos. When you look at a preference test around Latino white. The more people avoid eye contact and exhibit other signs of nonverbal discomfort around persons labeled as gay. The less willing people are to interact with a person who's assumed to be gay, depending upon their preferences on that dimension. So the nature of the implicit biases actually matters in our interactions in ways that are often outside of our consciousness. Now, what are the roots of implicit associations? First is, what is similar to us? In particular, along dimensions on which we represent either the dominant group in the society or the privileged group in the society in terms of location with regard to status and hierarchy, and social status and hierarchy. What's familiar to us, and this what I was just referring to, is this notion of dominant groups. It's likely to be the direct. So why is it that, when we look at the women's ratings around the gender dimension, they don't look any different from men's? It's because, what's familiar to us, as well as the fact that males dominate in the workplace, both numerically and in terms of status, and women are more likely to be the partner who stays at home with family. That's similar to us, and that's also the nature of the social organization that we're in predominantly. So let me tell you what I'd like for you to do. I'd like for you to take a few minutes, small groups, and simply brainstorm about where in managing organizations might these observations apply and lead us to sometimes produce results that we might not intend to produce that present patterns of what looks like discriminatory behavior, but it's not conscious. Where are the processes? Where are the places where, as a manager, I'd want to be conscious of the fact that biases might be entering our discussion? Right? I just want to be aware of that as we sit at the table and we're making decisions. Where are those places in organizations? Okay? So caucusing groups of 4, probably it'll get hard, 5 max, just lean over into your colleagues, and I'll give you a few minutes, and then I want you to come back and just, share with me your deliberations. Don't run out. Okay, let's reconvene. Let's reconvene. Let's reconvene. Let's reconvene. What kinds of things came up? Yeah. Yeah. Ah. Yep. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. And you know, it's always we had a interesting thing as you were talking, and you said the one, you know, you mentioned the piece about the assumptions that when we see women in high status positions, we wonder, did they do something to get there? And all of a sudden, there was kind of this murmur in the room that, you know, is oftentimes the murmur of discomfort, the murmur of, I can't believe he said that. It's true. I can't believe he said it. And what it often leads to is people then feeling censored. Right? I'll never say that again, because what do people think about me? Other things that came up. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. So it enters into the hiring process. Can enter into the hiring process. Yeah. Yeah. So you know, if you think about two things coming up here, one is right. It enters into evaluation when I try to explain how somebody got somewhere or where they should be. It enters into the hiring process. Other things we think it enters into. Yep, in the back. Yeah, interesting point. So if people are distant from us, so we don't have any personal data about them, it's easier to go with the stereotypes. And imagine what's happening as we move into a world where we have distributed teams, for example, working on different continents. And, you know, what do I think is, you know, why do those Irish act like that? And why do those Chinese act like that? And here I am, here we are in Washington, and we're the center of objectivity and reasonableness because we don't have any personal interaction that gives us new data, because we do have the ability to take in information that defies our stereotypes. What this implicit attitude would say, where we're likely to go first. And if we don't have some way to catch ourselves, we're likely to anchor there. So I don't want us to think that, you know, we're slaves to our implicit biases, but the question is, you know, how can we catch ourselves? Other things that came up. Yep. Yeah. And there's lots of data about that that's been generated about people who go into stores. How do we identify who the customers are that are worth us spending our time with? Yeah. Other things that came up. Yeah.
What about the topic of existing convert bias?
Yep. Say a little more about it.
I work for a law firm, and there is
Yeah, now how might that relate to implicit biases?
It's overcorrection. It's recognizing a problem and then trying to correct it by forcing themselves to, basically prove to themselves that they're not biased by putting people in based only upon sexual orientation, color, sex.
Yeah. So in some ways, right, we know that so we look at ourselves and we say, kind of can't be by accident that we look like we look, right? I mean, we can't say, we no longer can say that we've got the best people when we've only got one kind of people. So now we've got to correct for that. And we know we're biased, so we put into place processes that are designed to correct that bias. And a potential danger is we overcorrect. We start to do things that actually somehow undermine what our real intention is.
Interesting to expand on that point is, so they take that action and they, like I said, they overcorrect for it, but the problem is they don't put the stopgap measures in place to kind of maintain the culture behind keeping those people, right? So in our organization, we work with the government, we do the very same thing. We bring them in, we try to foster this diversity thing, but then the culture around that doesn't maintain and encourage them to stay. And they're like, I don't like this, I'm out of here kind of thing. So you get them and then you lose them. So that's part of the disconnect. Well, their biases come out and they're more pronounced after the fact. You're not thinking about even operating, they're in your group when you do that.
Yeah. I mean, right, there we create the initial diversity, but we don't do anything to help us manage the biases, so we just create a culture. Another thing that happens with it is we hire people who actually meet all the criteria, but because we've got a diversity effort going in, it actually makes people operate off their biases even more. So now I look at you and I say, I quickly move to the conclusion that you must not be as qualified. And now I start to interact with you in a way that says, because we had this diversity initiative, you must not be as qualified. It's a very unfortunate judgment, but that's what leaders in organizations have to manage. Is if we want to create a more diverse workforce, we're going to have these, and we're going to have these explicit efforts. What I've got to do is make sure that the people who work for me, I believe in them, and manage my organization, right, that says, I only have people in the seats that I believe in. And manage my organization accordingly, which then is about creating that kind of environment. So let me just come back to some points I want to make before I run out of time. We can't necessarily detect or control biases in our judgment. Our systems, processes may unintentionally facilitate biases. And part of the remediation, in my view, is to make sure that our processes are as transparent as possible and that there's accountability, that we ask people to be accountable for what gets produced in our organization with regard to what our promotion and hiring patterns might look like, that we're also transparent about what the criteria are. Our explicit minds and values do matter, okay? So again, I want to, it's not that we have to be slaves to our unconscious biases because our explicit minds and our values do matter. What we have to do, though, is figure out how to structure organizations to maximize opportunity for intention to be translated to action. For intention to be translated to action. And oftentimes, the intent of programs like the ones that what's your name? That James was talking about, where we're going to focus on, trying to explicitly make sure that we have a more diverse organization, are about trying to translate that intention into action. But what are the areas of intervention for us to focus on in terms of helping to manage our implicit biases? One is around decision-making processes. Another area is hiring, mentoring, promoting. And I'm going to say a bit about each, and end with some notes about what I think is the most significant area of intervention, which is around ourselves. So with regard to decision-making, you can ask some questions. Who we convene to make decisions, how quickly we make decisions, after action reviews, how did we get here? Who we convene to make decisions. There's a fair amount of research that shows that the more diversity you have in a decision-making group, the less likely you are to produce a set of decisions that, follow a certain pattern of bias. Okay? There's been research that's looked at, for example, the selection of high potential candidates in organizations. And without, much effort around saying, what that population needs to look like, if you have a demographically diverse group of people making the decision about high potential candidates, they usually select a more diverse group of high potential candidates. So who's around the table matters. How quickly we make the decision. And for me, this directly relates to how we might put some hedge against the implicit biases we might have. And if you're a manager, right, and let's say you've got an assignment. You need somebody to go somewhere and take an assignment for you, and it's one of those assignments that if they succeed, it will be a feather in their career cap. Now, I rush out of my office, got to find somebody, take this assignment. They're going to have to travel on the assignment. And I've got Amy and Bob. And they're both in their early 30s with small kids at home. And I can automatically assume, I'm likely to automatically assume that it's going to be easier for Bob to say yes than Amy to say yes. So I'm going to go to Bob because I don't want to put an imposition on Amy, right? Because there's going to be some imposition here. And oftentimes what's operating is that implicit bias that connects gender differentially, depending on male or female, to career and family. If I make that, as opposed to if I slow myself down and I say, okay, these are two people who are eligible for this opportunity. Let me think about each, maybe have a conversation with each about the possibility for this particular assignment and find out what their capacity might be to do the assignment. That's about slowing ourselves down. And oftentimes, in particular around personnel decisions, we make snap judgments. We even make them, in interview processes. Right? I just kind of decide this person's got it, whatever it is. After action reviews, how did we get here? And what that means is, we make a set of decisions. Do we ever step back and review, okay, so how do we go about making these decisions? We are where we are, but what can we learn about our process? And that's about creating a feedback loop that helps us to be more intentional in our processes. And in this as well, having diversity as an explicit criteria. So for example, when I'm thinking about who I convene to make a set of decisions in the organization, if there's a set of biases that I'm aware of, not wanting to have influence what happens in the organization, do I put together a group that might allow us to keep those potential biases more in check. Hiring. What's better, single-rater interview or multi-rater interview? It's the multi-rater interview. Having multiple people weigh in. Now, there's a potential, this comes back to decision-making, the note in decision-making, and that is if you have a very homogeneous set of multi-raters, they're likely to all converge and now, say, be even more certain that there's no gorilla. Okay? So the diversity in that group matters, but multi-rater interviews are likely to be more helpful. What controls bias better? In-person interviews that are focused on cultural and skill fit, blind interviews with a competency focus, where we don't know, like those interviews that they did in the orchestra, external expert interviews with a competency focus, and standardized tests with a competency focus. And where bias is most likely to come in is if you start the interview process, and this is what most organizations do with A. We're going to bring people in and we're going to focus on, are they a cultural fit and a skill fit, and we're going to do it in the context of a set of individual interviews. We've even found, there's even some work around that's been done with professional service firms where when they do the first interview over the phone, so they can't see the candidate, they produce a much more diverse group than when they simply rely on first-time interviews on campus. And part of that relates to the fact that, right, once I see somebody, I'm much more likely to lock in on what their image is that they're projecting rather than what they might be able to bring as a set of skills and perspectives about the work that might be helpful to us. And once they come for the interview, after we've done the phone interview, and now they come into the organization, somebody has already locked in on what the positive characteristics of this individual may be. So then if there's something quirky about them in terms of, they don't necessarily wear exactly the right uniform that we wear here, there's somebody who's now locked in on, well, there was a positive thing that got this person in the room before we saw what they looked like. And is that dimension that we're getting hung up on, if it's really important, something that we can easily coach a person around? And external expert interviews with a competency focus are also, and this is one reason why many organizations use search firms. So the idea here is to figure out how we reduce subjectivity or manage our subjectivity. Mentoring. Mentors, or think about it in terms of coaching, counseling, advocacy, opening doors to stretch assignments, protect from unfair criticism. And one of the things that complicates mentoring that also connects to implicit biases is chemistry. Right? A lot of our mentoring relationships, when we go back and we think about, well, how did they start? Why did I pick X? It frequently comes to, there was just something about a connection that X and I had that allowed me to basically get on the same page with them. What we often find is that in cross-cultural and cross-gender mentoring relationships, that instant chemistry doesn't come as quickly. And if, for example, I'm a manager and I've had mentoring relationships with other African American males, and I assume that, I'll know who the people are to mentor who are not like me because I'll get that same feeling, it's likely not to come. Because we make judgments very quickly about people's ability to connect to us. And if we can hold those judgments in abeyance and focus on, is this a person I want to invest in, we often are able to build very successful relationships across lines of difference. Promoting. Who decides? The manager by him or herself, a committee. Committee with an advocate is likely to provide us the best hedge against our biases from the vantage point of we have multiple people. We also have someone in the room whose job it is to make sure that we don't overlook what might be the positive sides of a candidate. Okay, someone whose job it is to pick out why should the answer be yes for an individual, rather than what sometimes happens in these kinds of committees, right, which is where we search for why should the answer be no. And we're much more likely to lock in on those when we're looking at people who are in the minority inside of an organization. What criteria we use and being clear about what the criteria are and applying them across all candidates. What the data are in terms of how we determine whether or not a person meets the criteria. What kind of data are we using? And again, the idea is to reduce subjectivity. So, just some final notes. It starts with leadership. How diverse are we? Do we have, it should be a culture that is safe to talk about cultural differences when they matter? Do we have a culture where it's safe to talk about cultural differences when they matter? Are the leaders invested in the idea that they are not biased? Sorry, I wrote this slide last night about 1 o'clock in the morning. I apologize for the typos. So there should be a quote there, another quotation there around not biased. And or that the organization is a pure meritocracy. So in other words, the more invested we are in the idea that we're not biased or that we're in an organization that's a pure meritocracy, the more vulnerable we are to biases. Because we become so invested in that part of our self-image. We don't want to do anything that allows us to get data that we may not be right. Do we have the capacity to learn from our differences? And this connects to the article that you read that my colleague and I, Robin Ely, wrote around diversity perspectives. And what's the perspective about differences that people have and why it's important for us to be diverse? One is where it's simply a discrimination and fairness argument. We want to be diverse because it will illustrate that there's no discrimination in our organization. We treat everybody fair. The access and legitimacy argument, we want to be diverse to the extent we need to in order to connect with the diversity of the stakeholders that we have to deal with, especially if they're customers. And then there's this learning and effectiveness, or what we now call integration. Sorry for the typo. Should be integration and learning. But this is where the ultimate goal for diversity is to become a resource for learning and organizational improvement, which then makes incumbent on us to create the conditions where people feel safe in the organization, where we can talk about differences, where we feel like we can use our cultural knowledge to help the organization move forward. So it's okay for me to say where my opinion comes from, that it's connected to some part of my experience, and not have to pretend that I got there through some particular legitimate calculus that we should all be on the same page about. Everybody knows. You hear people in organizations often say, well, everybody knows. And how many times have you sat there and thought, everybody doesn't know that? But we don't say it because it's, everybody who fits here should know. But there's a part of my experience that tells me there's another way to see the world or a particular problem. Do we make it legitimate inside our organization to talk about those things? So I'm right at the time that we had allotted. What I hope you take away from this is, one, some reflection on yourself and how you think and feel about yourself with regard to these questions of bias and objectivity. Also, that you take away from this the idea that we don't have to be a prisoner to these aspects of ourselves if we develop awareness around them and we create accountability for ourselves and whatever groups we're leading to be as vigilant as we can to create organizations and structures that help us to avoid being captive to our biases. I also hope that you'll take this as an opportunity to also engage the differences that are among you as a group and to think about what can you learn from each other through the lens of the ways in which you're different rather than simply the ways in which you're similar. Because I really think that both organizations, work organizations, and educational organizations become much more powerful when they have that capacity to work across differences and to learn from differences. And we don't see it as often or richly as I think we could or should in our organizations today. Okay? So thank you.